Good morning, everyone. Okay, just while we're letting people in, perhaps you'd like to post something in the chat about who you are, where you're from. Just give it another minute just to let people settle into the call. Okay. Well, thanks for joining us. Lovely to see everybody. Just as an introduction, as some of you may not have heard of the Coram Innovation Incubator before, just to say what we are, but basically we'd like to say we're a catalyst for change. And what we seek to do is empower leaders and managers to develop, test, evaluate and scale innovative solutions that improve the quality and impact of services provided to children and young people. And what we do is we facilitate, celebrate and catalyse innovations that lead to significant and sustained impacts on children's life chances. And we deliver that through services such as training and learning events, consultancy and expertise, networking and partnerships, and sector knowledge and insights. And one of those events is today's webinar. We have our avid supporters from EY, Peter and Andy. EY have been fantastic supporters of the Innovation Incubator, and we've got Andy and Peter here today to deliver the webinar, and I will just hand over to them. They're very capable hands. Welcome.
Thank you. So I'll just I'll share the slides and we can get started. Happy to be here, everyone. So we would like to take you through AI, a very hot topic at the moment, and really about how AI can be used for good and to help people. And that's going to be the main focus of our presentation. In terms of the structure, we'd like to take you through a few introductions, introduce myself, introduce Andy in a bit more detail, talk about what AI is, what AI means in practice, how you can start your journey on using AI and understanding AI, and then a bit of time at the end for some question and answers. So to start, let's kick off with some introductions. Andy, do you wanna go first?
Yeah, of course. Hi, everybody. I'll be talking a bit later, but give you a sense of who I am first. My name's Andy Fuller. I'm a partner in our what we call AI and data team, and my particular focus is on everything that we do with government and public sector clients. And we're doing some really interesting things. We'll perhaps talk about some of those as we go through this webinar, but looking forward to chatting later. Peter.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Andy. Yeah, my name is Peter Katsalis. I'm a senior manager within Andy's team. I'm a data scientist and AI solution architect. So I've helped deliver data science and AI solutions to different areas of governments in the past decade. And my passion is how you best use AI to help people, to enable people to do better things and get better insight out of what they do. So let's kick off with a few definitions. So AI is a very broad term, and when we talk about AI for good, we need to understand what AI means overall. So I want to take you through kind of the broad spectrum of what AI can be. Some of you may have a car which has some self-assisted driving feature. That uses video AI to detect what's on the roads, if it's people, if it's cars, if it's objects, and make a decision about what it needs to do next, whether or not you're veering off track, and how it brings you back on track as well. So that's a good example of kind of how AI can be used to assist. And I use this term very loosely, but think like humans. Other AI applications span from something that would happen in an app you're using, maybe Uber. How does it know the right route to take to be able to take a person or pick up a person and drop off a person? There's a routing algorithm in the background. So there's AI's is slowly being integrated into things that you probably use on a daily basis. Even this application, if anyone's turns on captions and wants to see that transcript, that's a voice to text model that's running in the back end to be able to take our voices and help people who may have some challenges hearing them. And ChatGPT, there's been a big thing over the past few years, the ability to kind of summarize information and talk with an agent which understands what you're asking it to a certain degree. And this is a really small piece of the pie about what AI is, but the important thing to know is that it is being integrated into loads of things we do, and it probably will continue to in the future. Andy, do you have anything else you would like to add to this point?
Only really to say that, as with everything, there are layers of. I mean, I can't remember if you've got a slide talking about this a bit later, Peter. But AI has been evolving and coming for a long while. I think it's nearly 60 years now since the term was first coined, and what some of the things that have perhaps made it much more on everybody's radar at the moment are as a result of ChatGPT in particular. But I think now we're in that exciting stage where everybody can see all sorts of things it might be possible to do with it. But perhaps the where we've got some way to go still is how you translate a possibility into reality. And I think that's what the next few years are going to really be occupied by. But there are already things that people can do, and hopefully we'll talk about those later.
Thanks, Andy. And before we go to the next slide, talk about the timeline of AI, I just wanted to pose a question to everyone in the chat. So from your knowledge of AI and what you do on a daily basis, what is something that you would love an AI intern to do for you? What would you, if you had an AI agent or intern here to be able to help you out throughout your day? Feel free to type in the chat and share your thoughts. It could be, I would like someone to help summarize notes. I would like to help someone capture my thoughts and organize them. I would like someone to draft an email for me. Feel free to add that in. Preparing basic slide decks. That definitely is the dream.
What would we do with all our spare time, Peter?
So this is the slide that Andy alluded to earlier. The evolution of AI. Andy, would you like to cover this? Cover this slide?
Yeah, I'm happy to give it a go. I suspect you've got a more learned perspective on it than I have. But as I said, the initial term artificial intelligence first became part of our vocabulary in 1943, and really it was exactly what it says on the tin, if you like, in that it was the sort of the use of computers to do something that a human being might have done before. And that, to break that down, that might have been simple things, relatively simple things, I say, like automatic number plate recognition these days is something we kind of take for granted, but that's using computer vision to identify where on an image a number plate is, and then converting that into text. So that's a very sort of granular aspect of artificial intelligence. Over a period of time, the concept of machine learning, which is based on building statistical models based on data that's been gathered in the past, and then looking at statistically how might that data predict what might happen in the future. And that's something that is used increasingly widely for example, I've used that in several cases to look at ways of reducing fraud used as part of a process. So you look at the potential risk of fraud in a particular claim or something like that, and machine learning is a good way of highlighting the potential risk of that. Then you start to move into deep learning, and deep learning is a build on machine learning, but perhaps the difference is that you would maybe have a more complex solution, and you might set that that model a challenge, and then leave it to work out how to solve that challenge. Which there are lots of different frameworks and ways in which one can do that now, but that's where you're really starting to encourage and the model or models to start to think for themselves as to the most effective way of solving a particular problem. And then we move to the generative AI, which is the relatively recent breakthrough. I mean, we say on here 2017, which is when this sort of concept started to be worked upon, or the early models. You're probably aware that the first version of ChatGPT that most people are aware of was version 3, but indeed there was versions, I'm sure, 0 to 1, 1, 2. And I remember, Peter, you did some thinking on I think it was on GPT-2, if I remember rightly, about describing images or writing text a long while before ChatGPT became such a big part of the AI narrative. And again, that's well, if we look at large language models, which is obviously a big part of generative AI, the way they work is, depending on who you speak to, they have been trained on the whole of the internet or a huge body of text in a large language model's case. And really what it does is, based on the prompt that you give it, it then predicts what the most likely next letter or words, or as we increasingly getting to tokens, which is packages of words or letters, would be. And it creates a very, very credible sounding text response to a prompt. And by using that and perhaps some of the other techniques that we're talking about here, you can start to create really powerful AI capability. I don't know if I've done that justice, Peter, but I'll leave you to mop up any bits I missed.
Certainly done that justice. And I think the only thing I'll add is the pace of change, and how quickly it's changing over time. While some of these things have been around for a while, like machine learning was initially kind of coined and created in best part of 40, 50 years ago. It only really became a huge the computing power and the ability to be able to use it only really kind of kicked in maybe in the past decade or so, in terms of actually being a thing that people are using as that much. And the same thing applies to generative AI. LLMs have been around for a few years now, but only recently have they come to a point where people are widely using them. And as Andy alluded to, several years ago, I had a play around with the generative AI in terms of image creation from text. And that was only, say, 2 years ago. And now that technology has evolved to the point where companies are using it to generate adverts completely from scratch. So the pace of change is very quick, and I expect it to continue. So different types and uses of AI. I don't want to spend too long on this slide, but I thought it was just important to cover them. There are more than 5 types of AI, but I wanted to just introduce you to a few of them. On the top left-hand side is computer vision. So how to use AI to read forms, how do you use it to recognize objects. Cognitive AI is a different type of term, but it's used to talk about how AI is used for a person to interact using their cognitive functions, for example, chatbots, voice transcription, voice to text, and language translation. All this kind of comes under that banner of cognitive AI. Moving to the bottom right, generative AI. So when we talk about text summarization, ChatGPT, DALL-E, content creation, where you're creating images and videos from AI, that all fits under generative AI, and is powered by large language models, amongst many other things. That's usually the one that gets the most focus. At the bottom, AI for prediction. That's more to do with what we talked about in terms of machine learning. So traditional kind of statistics, how do you predict someone's behavior? How do you kind of forecast a trend into the future so you can understand what's happened based on what you've seen in the past? And the bottom left is an emerging field which has come out of generative AI, which you may have heard of, called agentic AI. And this is taking that ability to talk to AI and using it to be able to do things in the background. So having personalized agents and enabling better digital interaction. You could argue ChatGPT borderlines on agentic AI, but this is still a very, very early area which companies like OpenAI are moving forward with. So what can AI do for you? What can it do for caseworkers? What can it do for social workers? What can it do to help people? So imagine a social worker's turning up at someone's house. In a historical setting, they may have a tablet or a pen and paper, and they may have some notes previously that they've written down. And they're going to the house, knocking on the door, talking to people based on what they've seen in the past, and getting information, and then having that conversation. How does that change using AI? So I want to just kind of call attention to show you the art of the possible for kind of 4 different areas. Firstly, if you could use AI to have that real-time intelligence, imagine turning up on that door and having an immediate view of all the past visits or other events related to that property, so you have a better picture of what's going on. Not limited by maybe someone else's handwriting or note-taking, more to do with kind of what other things have happened in the background. How can that information be quickly summarized for you so you can immediately get a brief of what's happened before? What do I need to talk about? What do I need to focus on? What recommendations could be done to kind of better interact with people and help people? And when talking to people and gathering that information, how can that process be automated? Could you have an agent which is taking the voices and the speech that you're doing and automatically note-taking and transcribing it? Immediately you start to get a picture of a large amount of the admin activity that might need to be done. Suddenly starts to become something that can be reduced with AI.
Can I just leap in there, Peter? I'm at an event, it's a EY event to talk about AI at the moment. I've managed to find myself a room so I can do this relatively quietly. I've just come from watching a demo where some of these points, admittedly in a completely different context, were demonstrated live on a stage in front of 200 people, so kind of real. And it was slightly different context. So it was an insurance claim that was being, a call was being listened to. And while the call was happening, recommendations for, and this is about capturing information about an accident that had happened. But the AI was prompting the person taking the call to ask certain details as they went through what was a fairly unstructured conversation coming the other way. It also captured details of all of the information that was discussed in the course of the call and put it into both a case note and indeed into the application that is being used to process that claim. And it also provided some feedback to the person handling the call to say, next time, try and do these things. I notice you could have used perhaps slightly different words, or you didn't end the call in quite the same way as you should have done, to improve overall customer experience. So, as I say, a very different context, but hopefully gives you a sense that all of these things in sort of, if you look at them separately, are very possible, and increasingly it's possible to create, as Peter said, a set of, if you like, agents that can do different parts of that process, and it can be pulled together to create something that is changes the way that people work very, very effectively. Sorry, bit of an interjection, Peter, but I thought I'd share that hot off the press.
No problem. Always welcome. And sounds like a really, really interesting talk.
Really cool. Yeah.
Very cool. So when looking into the benefits of AI and what good looks like, at least at the moment, I want to dive more into the concept of AI using AI-powered smartphones. So what admin activity, what manual data capture can be used to help you in that process? So I want to call attention to a couple of points. So could you use AI to automate approval checks? For example, documentation IDs, could you have that automated approval process be happening? Not just the ability to sign things, but also being able to make sure that the person you're talking to is the right person. How do you speed up that process using AI? Is it right to speed up that process using AI? Is an important question. But how can that manual effort be automated and sped up using AI? Similarly, smartphones using, if you potentially had something on a tablet which is actively updating, how can you simplify the data entry process rather than capturing notes and taking information? How can you summarize that information and reduce kind of the translation error to make sure that everything's being captured, that there aren't potentially some points which might indicate someone's particularly vulnerable or having a challenge which is missed out from a previous conversation? How do you make sure that it's not just about saving time but improving the quality of the information that you capture, so that the future you or someone else may be able to kind of build that picture to better help people? And kind of going further, enhanced decision making in case review, that real-time ability to be able to summarize information is really key. It means that not only is it a time-saving effort in terms of you being able to digest that information, it's also a matter just to provide insights where it's needed. For example, imagine if related to if you're in a house and you have a tablet, and as something happens, you have a push notification to be able to give you something that has changed, or you're in a conversation with someone, as Andy mentioned, and midway through that conversation, you're given a nudge or some information that you can bring to it instead of it being done later. That ability to deal with things in real time really helps you have more meaningful conversations, and also to have a single more useful conversation rather than having to revisit and there be a delay in the delivery of information. Andy, is there anything else you would like to cover on these points?
No, I was just trying to do a live demo of some of those points while you talk, Peter. But you keep going, and I'll try and put some a picture of some terrible handwriting, and then it turned into notes in the chat in a moment. But I think what you can probably see from this is that this is a way you start to string some of those different components of AI that we were talking about together in such a way that that creates a really powerful outcome. The one thing I would perhaps add, and I think this is something I'm increasingly excited about, and I'm not going to attempt to do a demo of this now, but helping to improve the way conversations happen is also something that is really possible now. So it might be that you perhaps have a form that needs to be filled in that starts the process of applying for a benefit or something like that. Well, now instead of perhaps staring at a 12-page form on a website, or worse yet, being sent it in the post, you could have a conversation with either a person or perhaps even an AI to take you through that. And if English wasn't your first language, there are certainly models now that can support conversations perfectly well in multiple languages. And this can even be used to act as a translator between someone who doesn't speak, two people who don't speak the same language. And there are videos of this happening. It's just amazing to see. And it could be used to really facilitate much better communication between people. And if the amount of rework and effort that follows those sorts of examples out in the real world, I know is both very time consuming and costly. So I think that's another dimension to this that can certainly help reduce the amount of errors or rework. I'll let you keep going, Peter.
Yeah, sure. And I'd like to also, now we've talked about some of the efficiency gains which could be captured from AI, but I want to talk about an area which I'm, if anything, more interested in than this, and I think it's particularly useful. And that's really not just about efficiency gains, but experience improvements. How do we help people throughout challenging processes using AI? So I would like to draw focus to the adoption process. It can be a very difficult time for children, and a challenging time for new parents who are helping children through that process. So how could, say, AI be used in the future to help people through that process? Imagine using Gen AI and asking the question to children, what would you like your future room to be? And instead of, say, having crayons and drawing, which is adorable and very, very good, well, my drawing is still not great, and I probably still couldn't draw my room with crayons. But using AI, I probably could start to map it out a bit. Imagine if you could help use these tools to give people kind of a better understanding of what's happening, and help children kind of plan their process. Or imagine if you took a crayon drawing of what a room looked like, you fed it into Gen AI, and suddenly it turns into a detailed 3D view of what that room might look like, that you can start to share with people and get people really excited about that process. Something which I used more than I like to admit is using Gen AI, to help explain concepts to me. If you suddenly type in an advanced topic on anything and say, I would like you to explain it to me like I'm a 5-year-old, it will do its best job to explain that. And the adoption process can be a kind of difficult time for children to understand. Being able to help translate those difficult concepts to simple ideas is a really good application of Gen AI. It helps people word things more meaningfully, and it could also kind of give children a tool to be able to help them understand the process and make them feel a bit happier. And this isn't limited to children; it's anyone going through any process who needs to understand some things which are a bit hard to grasp. So explaining, and I recommend you all try that, because it's a game changer. If you ever want to learn something that you need to or want to, and you want it in very plain English. And the third one, which is, how do we give parents that support? Imagine if, so I'm a new parent. My daughter's 13 months old at the moment. Soon enough, she's going to be speaking and asking questions. And while I'm not going through the adoption process, what do I do if a child says this, and having someone to talk to and kind of give that advice and about things. Maybe it's the going to nursery process or going to school process. Having that assistance constantly there and available would kind of really help facilitate that. And through the adoption process, it's a very challenging process, and giving people the ability to get that information and articulating in a more meaningful way, and not just through interactions with a social worker, which would be ideal, but in times where they can't be there, but they still need that help, and having kind of a question answer tool that can help give them that support and comfort, can really change their experience of not just the adoption process, but just life in general. Any further points you'd like to add on that, Andy?
I think this is one of those areas where the difference that services set up, perhaps in the right way, and I recognise that we're in the spirit of a sort of innovation forum here, could be genuinely game changing. If you think about the ability to have access to someone who can give a perspective or offer advice 24/7 whenever you need it, in the context of, for example, supporting adoption, is just, it can make such a difference to the outcomes for the children and indeed the adults involved in that process. And I think these are the sorts of things where, if the theme of this is sort of AI for good, from our perspective, this is a great example of where that can make a huge difference. Yeah, I'm seeing that there's talk about Policy Buddy in the chat. I think that sounds like an excellent example of the sorts of things that can turn what might otherwise be deemed really dull, difficult to read documents into something that's truly usable, and helpful for people, as Peter said, with perhaps either different levels of reading age, or different abilities to process information if presented in a certain form or format, in a way that really opens up its potential to be helpful, and obviously it needs to be put in the right context, so that if people ask questions that are outside of its knowledge, or the buddy's knowledge, then it would point people in the right direction or connect them to the right people. But I think it'd be hugely powerful way of using AI in this context.
So Andy, would you like to talk about the what doing AI well means, kind of from a perspective?
Yeah, happy to. And I think a lot of the narrative around AI to date is often very excited about the possibilities, and we're probably being guilty of a little bit of that in the course of this presentation today. But I think what people are increasingly starting to realize is that you don't just do AI and magic happens. There's quite a lot needs to be done behind the scenes to make it truly successful and transformative. So one of the things that we find is often holding people back from seeing the full potential, or indeed being able to move from a very exciting proof of concept to being able to deploy something at scale, is, AI is the same as the old adage of garbage in, garbage out also often applies in the context of AI. Yes, if you want to use ChatGPT to help you write a poem about a monkey, you don't need great, well-managed data to do that. You can just ask it and it will do, I'm sure, a fine job. And then you can ask it to do a haiku or whatever. That's absolutely fine. But if what you're trying to do with it relies on data about a specific case or a particular situation, that data needs to be well managed, it needs to be well structured, it needs to be of high quality, and you need to give the AI the basis to understand that data so that it can incorporate it into whatever output you're asking it to produce. Equally, there's a need to focus on, well, how are people going to use this? If it relies on people to as an extreme, do coding, then it's probably not going to get used that widely by people day to day, unless they happen to be coders. And I know I'm not. So I suspect you'd be limiting the impact. At the same time, if it's user friendly, it will pull people towards it, and then I think you'll see the real benefit far more widely. I think one of the other things that stops lots of AI or data-enabled initiatives historically has been the fear that this is going to I'm no longer going to be needed, and a robot's going to take over my job. And certainly where we're seeing this as having the greatest impact is not in those instances. I mean, there are some things that people currently do that really could be done more effectively by automation or AI, but they usually tend to be parts of someone's job rather than the whole of it. So the way we would prefer to see this being deployed is to act, as Peter said at the start, to act as an assistant to human effort rather than replacement of it. And then the final thing, which I think is really, really important in this context, I say final, there's probably about 20 other things we probably could have put on this slide, but I think is really important, is the need to do this safely. So in another slide, I will talk about some of the different dimensions of safety that one might want to think about. But for a start, you've got the reliability of if you're asking it to make recommendations, how confident are you as making the right ones? And there's a very well-respected author and academic by the name of Ethan Mollick, who publishes a lot of material on how AI is going to change things that I'm a big fan of. He did an article only a couple of days ago, actually, that talked about the different ways in which one should and should not use AI. And this was one of the key points, was if you are asking it to do something, maybe one of the things you ask is it doing it better than the next available human, if you like? So if you haven't got a human being available, then maybe it's better to have AI doing something. But even in that instance, you might ask yourself, am I able to check that it's doing that, whatever it's doing, correctly and safely? And if you can't answer that question, then maybe you shouldn't deploy the AI to do that job, because how will you know? So I'll talk a bit more about what I mean by safely in the coming slides, but it's really important that you ask yourself those questions rather than just assume, well, it's AI, therefore it's good. And I think that's probably a good point to move on to the next slide, Peter. Exactly the slide I was hoping I was going to see. So to build on that point, I've been talking to quite a lot of people in the context of government and the public sector, and the question we're often asked is, look, everyone's talking about AI. It's super exciting, but equally, I'm all hearing that it's going to take over the world. We're all doomed if we deploy AI. It's going to take away our jobs, and so on and so on. So the question we've been asked is, well, how do we kind of plot a roadmap, if you like, to go from where we are now, which is kind of excited but not really doing very much, to being an effective user of AI in a way that delivers either better outcomes for, in many cases, it will be citizens in terms of the work that we're looking at, and maybe even does, is better for the people doing those jobs as well, because it helps them do some really dull or unnecessarily repetitive tasks much more effectively. Or indeed, it might introduce, there are ways in which it can be used that actually introduce a higher degree of confidence in the outcomes that are being reached. So in EY, we have this concept of delivering transformation over time, and we start with what can we do now? We say solve the now. We then talk about explore the next. So what is it that we might be able to do in the future? And then we move towards imagine what's possible in the future, in the longer term, and that might include scaling some really bright ideas up in the first instance to end-to-end transformation of an organization, albeit that tends to be quite a journey. So Within that, I've categorized, looks at like it's 10 different considerations, if you like. So you've got things like data security, you've got data protection, you've got compliance with various rules and regulations, you've got reliability. And what we mean by this is if you're asking the AI to predict or recommend or guide, does it make the same recommendations sufficiently consistently that you can rely or depend upon it? Is it being fair? Is there any bias inherent in the models that have been used to make those recommendations that you risk having problems further down the line? To the point I made earlier about the paper that Ethan Mollick wrote the other day, explainability is a really important thing. If you can't explain why a particular recommendation, outcome, or output has been created, you're probably creating a risk for yourself that that at some point in the future you'll be asked, well, why did that happen? And I would suggest that unless you can do that, and I'm not suggesting you all need to become data scientists to explain every aspect of it, but you need to be able to explain the inputs and show a clear sort of line of sight between those inputs and the output that followed. You then obviously have a question about cost versus value. I have seen some examples where an amazing outcome has been achieved by using AI, but then you look at the computing cost associated with achieving that, and there are examples where that has outweighed the value that that particular amazing outcome has achieved. Now, I think this is an area where the pressure on cost is always going to be downwards. So I think this is an area where there will be ever more opportunities to do more as a result of it, but it's certainly a consideration. And the final three, transparency. So if you're using AI, I think it's always best to be clear with whoever it is that you're using it for, that's the case, because there may well be some people who have a problem with that, and that again could cause problems further down the line. There's an aspect of sustainability. As I said, huge amounts of computing power can sometimes be used as a result of a relatively simple, or on the face of it, simple question of AI, and it might be that creates a more carbon usage than you would be prepared to have happen in the longer term. And then the final point is about accountability. So the example I usually use on this is autonomous vehicles. If AI is driving the car, who is accountable if it crashes? Is it the human beings sat in the car who've asked the AI to drive it from A to B? Is it the people who coded the AI to do that, or is it the car manufacturer, which I suspect will be the same party, but or is it someone else? It's a really important question, and one that I think people need to make sure they make part of their governance and their decision-making processes before they look to deploy AI at scale. So if we can move to the next slide, Peter, I'll try and add all of that information into something that looks at perhaps that roadmap that we were talking about before. Now, these slides have been done for a government or public sector client, but hopefully you can see some of the messages that I've been driving at and think about how they might apply in this context. So we looked at some of the areas where we thought there was greatest potential for AI in the public sector, and we came up with three broad areas. The blue blobs, and I'm not going to read through all of them, I promise, are around the process of researching, shaping, and then implementing policy. The green ones are around operational and productivity efficiencies, if you like, but I think the key point is productivity. So not sometimes productivity can be measured in a better outcome being achieved more quickly or at less cost. And then the final area is around reducing the level of risk or in some instances fraud, either in a particular operation or perhaps even at the sort of transactional level. So what I've done here is try to, and it's very subjective this, but we looked at along the x-axis. What I did was I aggregated all of those risks and other things that one should consider, like how much change, would I need to retrain all of the people in an organization? Would I need to restate my data governance policies and so on and so on? Would I need to recruit different people? And as well as the 10 I had on the previous slide, to come up with a measure of difficulty. Now, some of those things may or may not apply, but the more of those things that apply, I would say the more difficult or expensive it's likely to be that solution could be deployed. And then on the y-axis, we have a sense of the value. So is this going to be saving time? Is this going to be saving other aspects of those creating those better outcomes? And then if you combine the two, we're consultants, right? So we love a 2x2 matrix. You can start to plot those things onto that matrix. And the reason I frame it like this is it means that you can start to think about, well, are there some things that I could do now that would be valuable and that would potentially start me on a journey towards adopting AI? And that might be some of the things that are down in that bottom left-hand corner. They might not be the things that generate the greatest value, but they would be the basis to perhaps build some confidence in the first instance. And then as you evolve from there, you may well see that there are some things that you could do that are a bit more valuable, that are further up on the left-hand side, or indeed you might want to start moving towards the right, where the things are more difficult, but they may also contribute much greater value. So a lot of information condensed into one slide. Perhaps I'll just pick up one or two of the points on there to hopefully give you a sense. So right down almost the furthest to the bottom left is in the policy space is public sentiment analysis. So this is something where people already use this. So you might follow social media for a particular subject matter area, and you might score different tweets or posts and look at what the sentiment and indeed extract some of the content from those if you are starting to do some research on a new policy area or refining a policy that you're looking to put in place. You could then synthesize some of that information, moving to the next of the blue blobs on the right, and maybe even ask the AI to start drafting the broad points that would cover the public sentiment that you'd captured from social media or wherever, and combine it with some other documents, for example, academic papers, and start to draft what a policy in a new area might look like. You could then go through the gears on some of those other points and get to a point where, for example, you might be able to test. You could ask a series of different AIs to react to that new policy draft as an angry taxpayer, as someone who's very worried about losing their home because they're financially very hard pressed at the moment, and so on and so on. And that would give you a sense of perhaps how you might refine or improve that initial draft of the policy. So you might be able to use it as an early proxy for perhaps focus groups or some other way of creating a policy that is hopefully successful and inclusive in terms of the ground it covers. I won't labour the point further, but as you can see, as you move across to the right, you're starting to get into some things that could have quite a large-scale national impact in terms of monitoring a situation, perhaps highlighting potential risks. And this is a piece of work that Peter and I actually worked on a few years back, where we help to implement the National Situation Centre for the Cabinet Office, which is supports response to national crisis situations. We didn't get to build all of the things that I've talked about on here, but this is certainly where you could see something like that that's looking at a whole range of different situations that could develop, and over time it could get to the point where it would guide people in that situation centre, and indeed Cobra, for how to deal with those situations. And that I think is starting to become really high impact, highly valuable, but also quite difficult to do. So shall we move on to the next slide? Okay, so I've probably started to talk my way through some of this, but I'll perhaps try and bring this to life in the context of a largish government department. It could equally be a local authority where perhaps there's a lot of different applications for a particular service or benefit. There's quite a backlog. There's a lot of toing and froing between people around the different cases that are being managed. And so just starting to map some of the possible use cases that one might be able to apply to that process, and thinking about, well, what's possible now, what might be possible in the nearest future, and then how might that go beyond that. So I've already showed that it's possible to translate ghastly handwriting into a more streamlined data entry, but equally that could be around taking notes based on a conversation and summarizing them. If the service or benefit that's being applied for is perhaps very rules based, and it's possible to say that you've got completeness of information, it may well be that for certain instances it's appropriate or possible to automate the approval rather than making that part of a building backlog of work for someone to work through and rubber stamp effectively. Further along, you may well start to look at, well, how am I engaging with people? Is there content that I can create to either train people more effectively? And I talked about the example of where that might be used. That example of the insurance claims being listened to and then guidance provided could equally include personalized content for that agent in a contact center or a frontline worker, to say, well, next time, here are some things to think about, and here's how you might go about it. It might equally be for reaching out to users of a particular site or service and giving them more information. You may then find that, as Peter talked about earlier, you've got the basis to explain concepts for users of a service, and this is something that would really help people engage with that service. And then we've got the idea of an AI assistant for parents to help in the sort of context that Peter talked about earlier. And then I think over time we talked about AI assisting perhaps in the context of accessibility. It might be to help make personalized recommendations for either for parents or for social workers involved in looking after children, and over time that could evolve, I think, to really tailored care, perhaps even starting to look at preventative measures to reduce the possibility of less good outcomes from happening, and really create a far more effective sort of wrapper around people who are perhaps very vulnerable at a very vulnerable point in their lives. So hopefully that's not too fanciful, not too out there, not too science fiction, but gives you a bit of a sense of perhaps where some of those things that we've been talking about could be applied in the context of doing something for Coram like we are today. Shall we move to the next slide, which may be the last one? Might be that we're about to open up for
I think it's probably a good time to open up questions now. Actually, I think this is the it's good. It'd be good to finish on this one.
Yeah, so we've obviously talked for, well, it looks like nearly an hour. But time flies when you're having fun, and I really do enjoy talking about these things. But I don't know if that's provoked any thoughts from anyone, maybe any ideas as to where this might be useful for you in the context of what you're doing day to day. Hopefully, we've given you some examples to start that, but you may have others. Very happy to use that as a basis for a bit of questions, answers, or just chat. Don't all rush at once, of course. Just going to have a look in the chat to see if there's any points we could perhaps respond to.
We have a hand up here.
Okay. Hello.
Thanks.
Carol?
Thanks, Andy and Peter. That was very interesting and insightful. My question is, AI seems a bit far-fetched. How do I need to be a software engineer to start something, or can I just go online and ask ChatGPT to create an AI tool for myself? How does one be able to develop the perfect tool that we need to be able to get our work done?
Well, shall I start that? I'll start the answer, Peter, but feel free to leap in as well. I think and it's a very good question. I think we're not quite at the point where I would recommend asking ChatGPT to build you a tool to do stuff. There are ways in which you can do that actually now that are staggeringly impressive. I recently saw a video clip on YouTube of a PhD who was researching a particular subject that was way too complicated for me to understand. And he fed in the research papers that he had used to get to the point where he was posting his thesis, and then asked ChatGPT, actually it was Google, I think in this instance, to develop code to prove the point that he was trying to make, and it did. And the look of astonishment on his face when it not only generated the code but then ran it, and it ran successfully and showed the same answer or conclusion that he had reached is quite something to watch. So I think we're getting there, but I think I'd refer back to the point that I made earlier, that you need to think about how you would use it, and whether you could say for certain, as a result of if you ask the question, would you know if it was doing that job well enough to be something you could rely upon? You need to think about all of those risks, like data security and data privacy. I'm afraid all of those things don't get solved typically by the AI. They're things that you need to put in place behind the scenes in order to ensure that your particular deployment of AI was useful and safe, rather than just being appearing useful. So I don't think we're quite at that point yet, but equally, I think really what the message that I'm perhaps trying to convey here is that while it may not be fully democratized yet, it's not necessarily something to be feared. And if you engage with it in the right way, I think it can be hugely helpful. Peter, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
Yeah, I can add a couple of points. So I think when talking about kind of the barrier of kind of learning software development and trying to think about starting things up that way, with the use of Gen AI, that barrier is becoming lower. There still needs to be, at the moment, AI-assisted software development is becoming a big field. It's not replacing software. Well, it's not replacing the knowledge software developers have, but it changes how they use that knowledge and how they get that knowledge and how they write the code. And as a data scientist, how I use Gen AI and those kind of tools, the way I see kind of code and developments is code is a language for me to be able to do things. And I think that having something which facilitates getting my thoughts into code saves time from my perspective, and developing those kind of solutions. So I would think that that barrier will come down further and further, but we're not quite at that fully democratized point yet, as Andy mentioned. And I'd also like to echo the useful and safe point, which is that think about the kind of ecosystem behind kind of what you want to achieve. If there's data and that you need to point it to be able to have answers, kind of think about how important that is, because that really changes kind of what the solution is, the sensitivity of that, and also how important the output is to be 100% correct. With every sort of summarization tool, there's going to be some they call it hallucinations, where it'll say something which may not be entirely right. If you do need the output to be 100% correct, and there's no error, there's no risk, there's a risk associated with it not being perfect, it may not be a great time to use generative AI in that instance.
Yeah. I think probably I don't want to do the thing where we keep building on each other's great points, but I'm going to in this instance. One of the ways in which we've seen clients both in the public and private sector perhaps go on that journey is and it's to the point about using AI and automation perhaps to guide people. Sometimes what people do is, my favorite example is a well-known, perhaps slightly upmarket supermarket who will remain nameless, but they created an app with AI behind it to provide all people who worked in the stores with the basis to guide people in the shop if they've just bought themselves a particular meal, or what would be a great wine to go with that meal. And rather than unleash that on the public in the first instance, they provided the sommelier app, as they called it, to all people who worked in the shop, as a way to improve the way that they provided customer service to customers in the store. Over time, I think their plan was to put it onto the website. So it'd say, oh, by the way, I see you bought some venison, let's say. Perhaps you'd like this wine or that wine that's on special offer to go with that. So there are ways in which you can kind of you keep humans in the loop until the point where you're no longer worried that it's going to make some wild recommendation, and then perhaps move from there to unleashing it, if you like, on the wider public. Johnny, I can see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, hi both. I really enjoyed today. I guess my question and query relates to something that plays on my mind, which is we talk a lot about AI as being a singular thing, and actually the direction of travel seems to be different AI for different things. And I guess those two thoughts don't really marry, because I guess the most useful personal perspective is to have a thing that you interact with that can do multiple things, but that doesn't seem to be the direction of travel. And I guess from a local authority perspective, we have information inside different systems, and there's no kind of reason for those systems to encourage something to be able to interact with all of that info. So I guess, how do we stop this getting messy and stop local authorities needing to have 6 different pieces of AI to do 6 different tasks, or do we?
I'm going to answer that question in 2 ways, if probably at least. So first of all, I think you're absolutely right, Johnny, that we're in the sort of early stages of the mass democratization of AI, if you like. So every man and his dog is racing to offer, if you like, point solutions to particular problems or challenges. I don't know how long that will continue. I suspect there are some areas where something might be a fairly narrow use case, but that there's a lot of people or there's a lot of value generated by that narrow use case. And I suspect there'll be some instances where that persists. The other thing to say is that the more and more point solutions you have, the point I made earlier about making sure that you need, if they're going to do anything more useful than providing some very generic guidance, they will all have to connect back to the same data. So in the context of a local authority, the ability to support social care workers, for example, is going to be hugely reliant on social care data. But what if it also got data from your housing or your local health authorities, schools, and so on and so on? So rather than all of those being treated as other silos of data that would be used in very siloed ways. So I think the long answer to part one of the question is you're probably right. There's going to be a bit of that. I think over time it will kind of calm down a bit, or the use cases will become more all-encompassing. So it might be there'd be some solutions that support social care, but they will need data from multiple sources to be as effective and impactful as they could be. And with all of that comes all of the things I've said before about risk and, linking data across multiple systems and so on. So on needs to be done in the right way so as to not jeopardize people's privacy or their security and so on and so on. So I think we'll get through this. And at some point, I think what you're really talking about is a sort of artificial general intelligence type solutions, but I think we're probably still quite away from that. But we might get that sort of next level down of something that's really helpful if I'm an X or a Y person doing a particular job. Will come a bit sooner, I think. Sorry, a bit of a rambling answer, but a really interesting question. Peter, I'm giving you the difficult task of following up again.
Yeah, no problem. I think it's a great question, and one that's really important to keep in your mind. The way I imagine kind of AI, and this might kind of help bring some insight into that question, is imagine there are building blocks on top of each other. Kind of the bottom one being kind of processes you follow, the one above it being technology, the one above it being data, and the final one at the top being AI. Unless you kind of have those kind of clear processes and the kind of technology that you need to use, you can't take advantage of data storage, and without that good data storage, you can't take advantage of AI. And there's almost a journey which needs to be followed. For example, if you have the technology, the data, and the AI, but you don't have kind of clear processes to follow, you have AI which is kind of aimless, and it's trying to solve many things without being very specific. And I think an element of that which is quite missed out is, as you mentioned, data. Being able to bring everything together helps unlock some of that potential for AI, whether it's tabular data, whether it's unstructured data. Maybe you have physical forms. How do you meaningfully get that into a system to be able to use that as a data source? And I think that focus is going to be larger and larger over time to be able to bring that data together, because data is information and AI is a way for us to use that information to do things.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing to watch will be whether or not everyone loses heart with AI as being magic before they've sorted some of those things out. It's going to be a question of which triumphs. I think there will be some people that say, "Oh, it doesn't work for us." But I think the reality, the fairer question will be, have we done everything we needed to make true to get the full benefit out of it? And I think often people will miss that if they don't think carefully about that journey.
Thank you. Hello, I'm going to jump in now. It's Kevin. Tennant's had to step away, unfortunately, so I'm going to sort of just take over from her. Just in response to that question, Johnny, for me, I actually think, we've got, you've got something that's great at creating videos, something that's great at creating images and so on, right? There might be in the future some all-encompassing tool that can do everything. But actually, in the interim, we might end up getting a tool that might be AI powered that creates that sort of interface for you as a user that feels like it's one tool, right? And actually, when you put in your prompt or your question, it's using AI to say, okay, well, you're asking about this, so we'll use this particular tool, Policy Buddy, for example, or or this tool over here that can generate video. And so it'll feel like it's one tool to the end user, but actually is drawing on lots of different tools. If we're still having to have these sort of segmented, purpose-built AI tools, before we ever get to the point where there's one tool that can do it all, we might end up having that sort of stepping stone along the way there.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thanks. And exactly what I was thinking, in terms of helping staff to adopt technology and to interact with AI. Ideally, you want to be able to teach them to use a thing, not 10 things, because that makes that process easier to manage. Thanks, everyone.
And even part of that is the impact on, if you've got 10 different tools, how do you train everyone so they can use those tools effectively? There's quite a big bow wave of additional cost, if you like, as opposed to, well, there's one thing that you interact with and it can do 10 different things, is very different to 10 different things. And when do I choose each one of those 10 and what will it do is a far more complicated set of training or briefings to deliver, and indeed all the subscriptions and the whatever needed to make them all work becomes quite a large overhead, which may still deliver value, but over time I think will become unsustainable.
Definitely. I currently have one sort of internet browser that has lots of different tabs. One's ChatGPT for when I want to do creative stuff. One's Perplexity when I want to search for actual information and facts, and it's good for research. I've got one called Gamma, which is great for creating slides. Because at the moment that's how best to manage this thing for me. But it does mean I have to, have to keep track of what tools are good for what.
Indeed.
So in the future, I'd much rather if I could just say have one thing, and that was my gateway to everything.
That would be nice, wouldn't it?
Wouldn't it? Any other questions from anyone? There has been lots of good stuff in the chat. I'd also like to hear if there's any other sort of ideas that people have had, or actually how people are using it, if at all. Seen some interesting things in here. I saw someone mention about EHCPs, and I'm actually supporting a company that's trying to create a tool that can help draft an EHCP from various assessments that are done, and feed that in. I'm actually advising them, you don't want it to be perfect, the perfect draft. You still got to have something that someone can work on, I feel. Because otherwise, as you said, Andy, about that transparency and the sustainability of it, if AI does everything, then we'll lose the skills to do those things ourselves, and then we won't know whether it's good or not. You'll lose all the people who know whether or not what's been done by the AI is good or accurate and correct. So we have to make sure the human remains in the loop, and you can't be overly reliant on it doing everything for you. You still own the output. As a social worker, you're still responsible for the decisions you make and the things that you do, and for that family and so on. But yeah, sorry. Any other questions or contributions from anyone? Adam.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'll just share because I I put in the chat about the EHCP process, and I'm aware of that organisation, Kevin, that you're supporting as well. I think. So yeah, we've been implementing a kind of digital front door as part of our. So I'm a transformation lead supporting the Family Hub developments, which is DFE and Department for Health funded program. So part of what we've been looking at is digital transformation and how we communicate more effectively with parents and families of younger children, to almost kind of help them to self-serve and become more resilient in searching for information. So a couple of things that we've been working on is the use of chatbots and bot workflows to guide people through different processes that may appear quite complex. So we've done a lot of co-production with parents and professionals to understand. So one of the things we always ask is, what are the kind of top 5 common issues or challenges as a professional you hear from parents on a regular basis? Because what we found is 9 times out of 10 we can turn those into, we could automate those responses, which will then free up the kind of capacity in the system for admin or whoever it is to be working on other tasks. And one of those was, we know that the HCP process is one of the most searched and readily asked kind of questions around families and professionals who don't always know. So we've turned that into a kind of bot workflow, really. So set of kind of statements, and depending on the answer, takes you to a different process or a different response. And we'll be launching that when we launch our Send Local Offer platform in early spring next year. And then the other main development we're using is intelligent automation to push out personalized content and notifications to families. So if I very quickly give you an idea, I've been doing a lot of work with dads, and in terms of dads who are expectant fathers, there's national research that tells us a lot around dads being excluded from all of the information and advice. A lot of messages are focused predominantly on mums. So what we've done is we've devised a set of personalized messages that go throughout the whole stage of pregnancy. So from the very beginning of finding out that your partner's pregnant, all the way to the birth of your baby, dad signs up to some tailored messages and content, and depending on the kind of date of birth or the expected date of birth of the baby, depends on where the messages start being pushed out to them. So once they sign up, we know then that all those messages are going to be directly tailored and sent to their app. And we've built in responses for dads. So we ask for feedback. So after every third message, we ask them to respond with some feedback. And then we can kind of, evolve and adapt the messages depending on the feedback we're getting. So there's just kind of, and that's what we're calling a kind of digital intervention, a digital pathway that we can automate, and we can adapt and scale across lots of other different kind of different situations and different issues, really. So that's just a couple of examples for me.
Thank you. And you're right. I think, it's the purpose you've got there is great, but you can take the underlying sort of premise of, targeted information, timing of it, and so on and so forth. It could be applied to anything. So I've also had this idea of service directory, for example. In your local area, there are all sorts of different services that can help families. If you have a GPT or a bot that is trained up on those, someone can come along and just ask, I need help with this. Rather than using Google and having to come up with the right terms that then returns that, well, hopefully, in the search finds you the service that you need. Actually, it doesn't matter what language you use, if you can describe what your problem is, I'm sure you could build a tool that says, okay, and these are the services in your area that can help you. If you tell it where you live, it say, okay, and these are the ones that are within 5-10 minute walk of where you are. And in the future, even if it's linked into their capacity and their current spare capacity in the system, it could even help with directing people to where there is capacity, and so you're not having to wait, as opposed to going to somewhere where there's like a 6 months waiting list or something like that, and helping with those sorts of things. That's all based on the data that you've got to have in place for it, but it's all still the same underlying premise in terms of how you're using this technology. So thank you for sharing that, Adam. I'm going to wrap up. There's a few things I want to say. So obviously, first off, thank you, Peter. Andy's dropped off. Please pass on my thanks to him as well for supporting us with this webinar today and sharing all that really useful information. There's lots of stuff to be taken away, and we're going to be continuing this conversation. Tanya mentioned this has been delivered as part of the Coram Innovation Incubator, and one of the things that we offer for our members is the ability to create AI tools. So we can help build a proof of concept for our members. If you've got an idea, then we can build something for you and help you and have a little play, just to sort of see how does it work. We've got a little GPT sandbox where we can train it up on your own documents and so on. So yeah, we make that offer to our members. We've heard lots of really interesting stuff. I'm hoping you all go away and are really enthused and excited about AI. I feel like we're all a bit primed not to be, because whenever you watch films, it's normally about, doom and gloom and ending everything. But if you think about WALL-E, or maybe if you're a bit older, Short Circuit, they tend to have a slightly more positive spin on what AI might be able to bring us. And we are at Coram, our big thing is, like Peter, how AI can be used for good, particularly in children's social care, and we want to continue that conversation and learn. we want to share how people are doing it so that we can all learn together, learn from the mistakes as well as the positive things as well, so we can all move forward together and do this safely and securely. So thank you all for your time. We will be able to share the presentation. This webinar will be put on our website, so for people that who wanted to attend but couldn't, please do let them know and they can be able to watch it back at their leisure. But thank you all for your time, and I hope you have a great rest of your day, and because it's so close, Merry Christmas. Thank you all.
Thanks all. Merry Christmas.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, Catherine.